I'm talking here with Acharya Vishvamitra. Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Tell us about how you first got involved with the Nanda Marga.
Well, I took my first job in Charleston, South Carolina at the medical school at the Medical University of South Carolina. And I was a single parent at the time. And I found meditation to provide me with a great deal of comfort and solace, being a single parent. One day, someone knocked on my door on Sullivan's Island near Charleston. And my son answered the door and he said, "Dad, there's some people here to see you." And it turned out to be Govinda from California. And I had just come from California myself. I had done a postdoc in community mental health at UC Medical Center. And so Baba was following me back to Charleston. And Govinda and his wife, they had their baby. She had the baby in a papoose on her back. They said, "We had been downtown talking to some young people that you work with on a hotline. And we were talking to them about trying to find a Jagrati to set up meditation practices in and teach meditation." And they said, "Well, there's a crazy psychologist that lives on Sullivan's Island that's interested in that sort of thing." And I said, "Yeah, that would be me. Come right in." And so they came in and we had a nice vegetarian dinner. And he talked about the practice of Nanda Marga and yoga. And he said they were looking for a place to practice. And I said, "Well, I know of some places that might be for rent." So the next morning we went down, they stayed overnight with me. And the next morning we went downtown and found a place on Charlotte Street. It became the Jagrati for the next 15 to 20 years. And so they set up shop there at that Jagrati. And that was in March. And in April, Jatishwarananda came.
Which year are we talking?
This was April of 1971. And Jatishwarananda gave a talk at the Unitarian Church, and the only thing I could understand, the only word that I could hear him speak was atom, atom. He was talking about Brahmachakra, the cycle of creation, and he kept saying atom, atom. But when he came to the Jagrati, he was initiating people. And Govinda asked me if I was interested in getting initiated, and I said, "Of course." And so I got initiated with Jatishwarananda, gave me initiation. And so I had a real good structure for my meditation now with the Nanda Marga meditation. And I had a lot of good experiences there at that Jagrati and in my private meditation. But that was my beginning in April of 1971 with the Nanda Marga.
How long after that before you met Baba?
Well, it was, I went in 1978 to see Baba, but Baba was in prison shortly after I was initiated. And I went to India to see him in the jail. And that was the summer of 78. And he was to be released. We didn't realize it, but he was released in August of that year. But they weren't allowing us to visit with him at that time. That was in June and July of 78. And so they were arresting a lot of margiis. So it was a question of trying to keep from being arrested and go to the jail in hopes of seeing Baba. But it never happened. And I did contract 3 pathogens, gut pathogens, Shigella, Giardia, and amoeba. And I lost about 50 pounds. And I had to go to a nearby house of a family acharya to get enough strength to get back. And I was delayed in getting back. My mother was contacting the State Department. And I had 3 children at home. So it was a stressful time, but I was overjoyed to hear Baba was released in August of that year.
What was it like during that time? It must have been very exciting, the idea of seeing Baba in jail and avoiding getting arrested.
Yeah, it was exciting, like a cops and robbers game. Waiting to see Baba, we would go out to Pulwar Sharif, the prison where there were a number of acharyas that had been jailed. And when we'd go visit them, they were in charge. It's always like they were in charge. They took over the director of the prison's office and had a chat with us. And then the prison allowed them to have a 24-hour kirtan in one of the barracks. And there were many margiis from that area, and some of us who were there to try to see Baba in jail who participated in that 24-hour kirtan. And so it was quite exciting. And we went one day to a senator's house to try to get his influence, to get him to ask the state to allow us to see Baba. And he was on dialysis, and he couldn't see us that day, but he said, come back tomorrow. And I ended up going to Pulwar Sharif again, and some of the margiis went to see him, and they were all arrested. It was too bad I wasn't with them, because they were arrested and kept in jail until Baba got out of jail, and then they were the first to see Baba when he got out of jail. But at any rate, I needed to get home with 3 children, and it was my fate to finally get home. But it was exciting trying to get the influence, proper political influence, to make it possible to see Baba during that period.
So when did you actually get to meet Baba?
I finally met Baba in Jamaica in 79. And we made a trip to Jamaica, my son and I, Sudarshan. And the first trip, Baba didn't show up. He got delayed in California, and he had to fly back to Germany and fly from Germany to get to Jamaica. So it was a second trip down to Jamaica that Baba was coming, and my mother and son went with me that time. So Baba finally arrived in August of that year. We were all excited and had the opportunity he would come to the up on the hill where we were all staying in a hotel. It was a cooperative hotel run by the employees, and we had the opportunity to see Baba daily come and give darshan. Then he lived in a house down at the bottom of the hill, a margii house, and people were lining up for personal contact there. And so I applied for personal contact and finally got the opportunity to have personal contact with Baba. And that was a very momentous occasion. I was told that Baba was ready to see me, and I went to the room and opened the door. It was a very large room, and Baba was on a bed on the opposite side of the room, and I prostrated myself when I went in. And he said, come closer. And so I came closer and prostrated myself, and he kept saying, come closer. And I got as close as I could get, right at the foot of his bed, just right next to his body. And he asked me for my name and my duties. I was a Bhukti Pradhan in Charleston, South Carolina at the time. And then he said, do something great for the suffering humanity. And then he saw how overwhelmed I looked when he asked me to do something great for the suffering humanity. And he leaned forward and he took his thumb and his forefinger and he pushed the corners of my mouth up, and he said, and smile a little. Something small can be great. Something small can be great. And I remember that henceforward, that something small can be great. And by way of example, I could smile more. And it's been easier to smile since. So that was my first contact. And when I went out of the room, I was enveloped in bliss and sat for meditation. I lost track of time. I was meditating for an hour or two. And when I came out of the meditation, I came into the hall and I ran into Ramananda, Baba's personal secretary. And he said, could you go to the British embassy and get visas for us for our trip to South America with Baba and his party? And I said, yes, I'll be happy to do that. So I went to the British embassy, and when I was getting visas for Baba and his party of 12, I thought, I better get a visa for myself just in case I might be able to go. So I brought the visas back to Ramananda, and I gave them to Ramananda. And I said, Ramananda, I also got myself a visa. Is there any chance that I might be able to go on the plane with Baba and his party to South America? And usually Ramananda was very strict about having access to Baba, but he said, yes, it'll be fine if it's okay with the pilot of the plane. And so I was very excited that at that point that I could at least ask the pilot that I might go to South America with Baba and his party. And Baba was telling in the next day or two, Baba told his acharyas, he said, it's time to go to South America and make arrangements. And they said, well, Baba, we're trying to find the plane, but we don't have one identified yet. He said, you can solve problems. and so it was in a couple of days that Baba would be going with his party to South America. And so we had to find DMC. And I had an opportunity to do Tandava and Kaushiki for Baba. And when we did Tandava, we had on a loincloth, and we had skulls and daggers. And I've seen the video since then, and it's always thrilling to see me there as a young man doing Tandava for Baba. When Baba gave the varabhya mudra, at the end of that talk that he gave, people passed out in bliss, and then all over the floor, everywhere. People were crying. And from my own experience, I was looking at Baba, and all of a sudden he just became an oval light, and then the room was filled with light, and I lost consciousness. And what woke me up was the sound of the sound equipment making a noise. And then I opened my eyes, and Baba was lowering his mudra. And Baba took a long time leaving after that to just, I thought, help people recover. He walked down the side aisle that had arches in it, and he stopped and talked with many people and gave people a chance to recover from that powerful vibration that he had sent out with his varabhya mudra. And that was a very memorable occasion. I had compared that experience with Didi, who said she had a similar experience of having that Baba turn into a pure white light. And interestingly enough, I went back for the 25th anniversary, 25 years later, for the 25th anniversary of Baba's arrival in Jamaica. And I went to that hall. It was a Sacred Heart church, Church of the Immaculate Conception, rather. It was an Immaculate Conception School was the name of it. And the auditorium that we were in, I went and I took a picture of the place where Baba had sat and gave that mudra. And when I developed that picture, there was an aura where Baba was formerly sitting.
Wow.
And that picture was in demand, and I have not been able to find it, but I know one day it's going to show up. I'm going to find it among all the pictures that I've taken. But this was the experience of the darshan with Baba at DMC. And then Baba left. Next day he was to leave, and everybody gathered together at the Kingston airport. And there was a strike at the Kingston airport. There was no one else there besides the Margies and Baba, so no one could fly home, and everybody was there for a final party with Baba. We gathered there, and Baba gave a talk, and very soon some acharyas came up and told Baba that the private plane was arriving, and that they needed to go and aboard the plane. And so Baba bid goodbye to everyone, and I walked out with Jatishvarananda and Baba, and the party of Baba and the party of 12 got on the plane, and finally the pilot came off the plane to do a checklist. And Jatishvarananda walked up to the pilot, and this was my moment of truth to find out whether I could go with them or not. So I asked the pilot, I said, is there any possibility of me boarding this plane with this party of 12 to go to South America? And he said, no, I'm afraid not. We're overloaded now with baggage and people. And Jatishvarananda chirped up. He said, let him go. He's very light. He's a vegetarian. Let him go. He's a vegetarian. And the pilot laughed, but he said, no, I'm sorry, but we are overloaded. And so I looked back at my mother and my son standing outside of waiting for me, and then something inside of me said, "Get on the plane." And so I had my bag beside me. I just picked my bag up and got up on the plane. And when I got on the plane, I was afraid to be embarrassed if there wasn't a seat. So I saw a place to sit in the baggage compartment at the rear of the plane at the end of the aisle. And so I just put my bag down and I sat on my bag in the baggage compartment. And the co-pilot came back and it was like he didn't see me, like I was invisible. And he shut the door, and then the plane started to taxi. As it was taxiing on the runway, the pilot looked up in the rearview mirror and saw me seated back there, and he said, "Hey, you." And I thought that was going to be curtains for me. I thought he'd stop and throw me off the plane. He said, the pilot said, "Come up to the middle of the plane so we can balance the load." So then I was relieved, but at the same time, I was fearing, well, I'm not going to be able to find the seat when I walk down the aisle. So I was walking down the aisle, and I came to the middle of the aisle, and Baba was on the left, and there was one seat left just opposite Baba on the right, and Baba gave me a namaskar and a smile, and he pointed to that seat. And so I sat there in that seat. And very soon after that, another Acharya who'd been up in the cockpit with the pilot came back, and there was no seat for him either. He was a late add-on as well. And Baba lifted his legs and pointed for him to get under his legs, and Baba rested his legs on him in front of Baba. And we had this marvelous flight across the Caribbean that night, beautiful starry night, and ended up in Venezuela.
Can you talk a bit more on what it was like being on the plane with him? Did he talk much? Was he just silent?
No, it was night. It was at night, and he was resting, and there was not much talk. It was mostly just quiet. It was very quiet, unusually quiet. And there was just this feeling, this wonderful feeling of floating through the air like on a magic carpet. And there was nobody was talking. There was a total silence. And I just glance out the window occasionally and just see this beautiful starry night and the glistening moon on the Caribbean Ocean below. But it was just a quiet time. And when we arrived, it was early morning before any flights had arrived, and we were the only activity in the airport. And we pulled up into an area, and we heard this beautiful kiirtan playing, and the margiis were receiving Baba and the party. And so we were deboarding, but it was a very quiet process going down there and arriving.
Right. So tell us about Venezuela.
The first morning I was there, Ramananda came to me and we're going on a field walk and you've been invited. I said, wonderful. And the field walk was going to be at a botanical garden, and it was on Monday, and usually it was closed for the public on Monday morning for them to do what they needed to do. And so they had us arrive at the back of the botanical garden, and we entered it and walking down a stone stairwell to come into the botanical garden. And Baba was walking with Ramananda on his left elbow and a cane right hand. And Baba stopped halfway down those stairs and said, I still require assistance because they tried to poison me, but they did not succeed, did they? And we said, no, Baba, they did not succeed. And this was referring to the time that Baba was poisoned in prison. And then Baba walked down to the stairs, and then he pointed with his cane about 30 away and named the genus, species, and family of a plant. And he said, the Portuguese brought this here in 1948. And so then we walked a ways further, and I was carrying his chair that he was going to use when he needed to sit. And he came up on a platform at a platform above a pool that was fed by a waterfall. And this very high waterfall was dropping water from a great height. It looked like maybe over 100 feet, 150 feet. And I was looking at it, and I remembered seeing a waterfall like this when I was in Ireland with my mother. And my mother there was an area where there was a waterfall like this, but there was no watershed. My mother asked the guy, said, where's all that water coming from? In her southern style. And he said, I'm sorry, madam, I'll have to get back to you on that. And so I was thinking that as Baba and I were looking up at the waterfall, and then Baba turns to me and he looked at me and he said, "My son, do you know the source for water, for waterfalls?" And I said, "Well, I know some, Baba." And he said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, there's rainfall and snowfall, and then there's springs that feed rivulets that end up creating a waterfall." And he said, "Yes, those are two sources, but what is the third source?" Knowing full well we're talking about a situation like we were observing here. And I don't know, Baba. Baba said, "The third source," he says, "in a country where there are small undulating hills and a high water table, the water forces itself out at the highest point. It's called the artesian principle. Now, my son, do you understand?" I said, "Yes, Baba." I understood very well that he knew what I was thinking and that he was my teacher and guide. And then he began talking about water, and he derived the word water, the derivation of languages on the rest of the walk. And that led later to him writing a book on the derivation of languages. But when Didi and I got back from that field walk, we said, "What are these field walks all about? What is Baba doing with these field walks?" But he was always very friendly and very loving and a good teacher. And that was the mode that he was operating in then, not the guru, not the president running an organization, not the guru bestowing bliss upon us in large quantities. But he was a friend, and he teaching us about the interconnectedness of everything in nature. And so I felt wonderful to be able to have this great teacher to go on a field walk with. And I was asked later to go on another field walk while we were there to a zoological garden, which I'd be happy to share with you as well.
Yes.
The zoological garden, 5 years later, I went back to Jamaica, and then I immediately went back to South America for the 25th anniversary there. I wanted to celebrate that experience I'd had with Baba. But in the first journey, the trip to the zoological garden began with Baba talking to a number of acharyas. I have a picture that someone took of me and the acharyas talking with Baba before we went into the zoological garden. And Baba was talking about the role that Venezuela might play later in developing a world government. He said, because of the diversity of this country, they can play a vital role in the development of a world government, world constitution, which Chandrasekhar is working on now. Then we went into the zoological garden, and the first thing that we saw were the tigers and lions in cages. And Baba said, "What family do these animals belong to?" And we said, "Baba, they're feline. They belong to the feline family." He says, "Is that so?" He said, "Look at this animal." He said, pointing toward the tiger. "It has a rounded skull, does it not?" We said, "Yes, Baba, it's a rounded skull." And it's a solitary hunter, isn't it? Isn't it a solitary hunter, he said. We said, "Yes, Baba, it's a solitary hunter." And he said, "Notice it has retraction of its claws, and it has a very short gut." And he went on to describe all the different characteristics of this tiger. And then he turned toward the lion and he said, "And this animal, what family does it belong to?" We said, "Well, it's also in the feline family, Baba." Baba says, "Is that so? Is it not, does it not hunt in prides and groups of lions?" We said, "Yes, Baba." "And look at its head. It's not rounded like this animal. It's angular." We said, "Yes, Baba, it has an angular head. And it doesn't have a retraction of claws." And we said, "Well, yes, that's correct, Baba." He said, "Well, how is it these two animals belong to the same family?" And we said, "But that's the way taxonomists have classified them, as in the same family." And Baba said, "No, this animal is the largest member of the dog family, of the canine family. It's a canine." And very interestingly, separating tigers and lions, feline versus the dog family, the canine family. And we came upon a platform. This time it was above a little pond with a sandy beach, and there was an alligator lying half out of the water on the sandy beach with its mouth wide open. and an egret was picking meat from the teeth of the alligator. And Baba says, you see these animals? They're a good example of coordinated cooperation. The alligator gets his teeth clean, and the egret gets fed by taking meat from the alligator's teeth. And about that time, a margii brother from Venezuela came running out. Baba, you know what they call this animal? Baba says, what is that? They call it baba. That's a Portuguese or Spanish word for alligator, baba. and Baba turns and points to himself. It points to his chest with both hands. He said, but this baba is not so dangerous. And then we went walking by the animals with rudimentary flippers. And Baba said, you see all these animals with rudimentary flippers? They were once land dwellers, and they evolved back into the sea to escape predators. And it occurred to me at that moment he said that he's talking about whales as well. And it's hard to imagine whales being once land dwellers. And then I found myself asking the question, because I'd heard recently about the overharvesting of blue whales by the Japanese and the Russians. And I went up to Baba and I said, Baba, are blue whales about to become extinct? And Baba turned and he looked at me in my eyes and he said, my son, one day people with blue eyes and blonde hair will be extinct. And people will come here from another planet to observe the ruins of this civilization. And they'll say, once there was a great civilization here. They built very tall buildings, had an advanced technology, but they couldn't learn to live together. My son, do you want the history should read this way? No, Baba, we'll have to perform your mission. And so that was the end of the second field walk. And then we returned to this house. There were about 40 or 50 of us staying in this house. And Baba gave some darshans. And on one occasion, there was conflict between one of the whole timers that was an attorney and Baba's doctor. And the acharyas were asking Baba what to do about this. And he said, have them check with Vishvamitra. He's a psychologist. He can help with this matter. And that was reported to me later. And of course, I felt some pride with Baba relating to me as having some capacity to help resolve a conflict between an acharya and his doctor. But that opportunity never presented itself. They seemed to be quieted down soon after that. Well, yes, I'd like to finish off with a brief story about when I went in 1987 to Baba's birthday, and also for reporting. We were getting ready to leave that, come back to the States with Ram Shadagar. I was with Ram and Sudeva, and we were flying on the same plane that afternoon. And so Baba was coming out for a field walk. And when he came out for a field walk, there was a large group at Lake Gardens, and he gave his usual panoramic namaskar. And then he looked over at us and he said, I understand some of my sons are going home today. And we said, yes, Baba. And he said, well, you must remember to come back again and again and again. We said, yes, Baba. And so then Baba got in the car and went off on field walk, and the personal secretary came over and he said, well, you can give us your garlands now. Baba has given you notice. It's the same as having an opportunity to give him your garlands, and you need to get to the airport in time to catch your plane. And we all said, that's fine, but we're going to wait until he comes back before we go. We'll take the risk of getting to the airport on time. So Sudeva and I worked our way on the other side of the Lake Gardens area, where we knew Baba would be coming and getting out of the car, and would be close to him when he got out of the car. So we were standing there when the car came back, and Baba again gave his panoramic namaskar, and then he started to walk away towards the path to go behind and enter his room. And Sudeva and I never figured out whether we planned it this way or whether it just happened, but we both piped up and said, Baba, the margiis from the New York sector invite you to come and visit. And Baba stopped in his tracks and he turned around and he walked back up to us and he was just 3 feet away. And he said, my sons, you're my representatives. Do you understand? And we said, yes, Baba, yes, Baba. Not really fully understanding what he meant by we were his representatives. And he said, and you must remember that this influence goes out in ever-increasing circles like ripples in a pond. Do you understand, my son? And we said, yes, Baba, we understand. And he said, well, you must remember again to come back again and again and again. And we said, yes, Baba. And then he turned and he walked away. And so I didn't have a clue. I was just enveloped in bliss in that moment. But over the years, I've thought back many times on this interaction with Baba. And I come to understand that what Baba is saying, that all of us are his representatives, we're his mediums, and that we are responsible for sending out the positive microbiome and loving devotional vibrations in ever-increasing circles, and to be identified with every plant, animal, and every aspect of the environment and all people in a neo-humanist fashion. And what he meant by come back again and again is like second lesson, to come back again and again to that consciousness that we are one with that pure consciousness, that we are one with him. Namaskar.
Namaskar. Thank you very much.